First of all, welcome to this Routledge webinar on drugs in sport. My name is Jeremy Benson and I'll be moderating the webinar today. I see from the delegate list that you are a global audience, so thank you for taking the time to join us. The webinar will be recorded and we'll let you know as soon as it is available. Mainly, this is an excellent opportunity to hear from three leading authors in what is a highly controversial field that is regularly in the headlines, and today is certainly no exception. In terms of running order, we'll have three short presentations from Verner, Vanessa and Rob. We will then make time for some questions, and finally I'll ask the presenters for their concluding thoughts. Just a reminder, audience questions can be typed and sent via the control panel, and we'll try to put a number of these to the presenters, although time is limited, so please bear with us. If your question is to a specific author, please let us know this when you send the question. I'm going to first hand over to Professor Verner Møller, Professor of Sport and Body Culture at Aarhus University, Denmark. Over to you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. There is, in my opinion, no doubt that the current anti-doping campaign began as a moral panic. All the ingredients Stanley Cohen identifies as the constituents for a moral panic evolved after the revelations of massive drug use at the Tour de France in '98. When custom officers found a team car loaded with drugs, a unison press started to campaign against the cheats. Since then, it has become a habit to portray doping athletes as folk devils. I think the whole furore was fueled by a genuine concern about athletes' health, and believe the formation of the World Anti-Doping Agency was the right response to what appeared to be a major challenge to the integrity of sport. The vision for a global effort to fight sports doping culture, which materialized in the World Anti-Doping Code in 2003, was, in my opinion, praiseworthy. The main purpose of the program was to protect athletes' right to participate in doping-free sport and promote health, fairness and equality for athletes worldwide. This was a sound rationale by which WADA took the moral high ground. However, it is safe to say that the anti-doping campaign has not achieved its goal, and it appears that the lack of progress has caused frustration within the anti-doping system and changed its mentality. What began as a moral panic transformed into a moral crusade in which the noble ideals about protecting clean athletes has eroded to a point where anti-doping has started to lose its moral credibility. The testing system has become more and more demanding. The respect for the athlete's privacy and integrity has faded. Every successful top athlete is now approached as a cheat who is yet to be caught. As a consequence, competing athletes are not treated equally, so the level playing field has effectively been abandoned. Fairness and equality has never been farther away, so far as I can see. There are many reasons for this. WADA has not succeeded in harmonizing anti-doping efforts across nations. Some nations are more committed than others. Rules are interpreted differently. Some national anti-doping agencies have more resources available to establish an efficient anti-doping system. Some have less. Target testing and whereabouts requirements make it harder to cheat for some athletes, not all. There is also the adverse effect of deterrence. If anti-doping has succeeded in deterring 9 out of 10 from using doping, the 1 in 10 who still dope has got a much bigger advantage. So thanks to anti-doping, athletes willing to run the risk of being caught are more than ever likely to reap rewards. In addition to this, the more efficient the testing system becomes, the more important it is for athletes who want to dope that they have access to experts who are able to beat the system. That is, the current system benefits the most affluent athletes who can afford to pay for the most advanced doping expertise. And even more concerning problem is the side effect of the pursuit of improved test methods and the expansion of the number of tests performed, namely that athletes who have no intention to dope and therefore are not particularly careful about monitoring themselves and their food are most likely to get caught. Since the establishment of WADA, there has been a number of unfortunate cases where athletes inadvertently have got a banned substance in their body. And in a crusader's mentality, there is zero tolerance and no mercy. A horrible example is the kart driver Igo Velitko, who competed in a race in Germany and subsequently was tested for the first time at the tender age of 12. Prior to the race, he had eaten an energy bar without knowing there was a banned substance in it. The young boy was banned for 2 years. The sanction that was reduced by only 6 months after appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Another more familiar example is the case of Alberto Contador, who won the Tour de France in 2010, but was tested positive for a minuscule amount of clenbuterol. The amount in his sample was 400 times less than a laboratory should be able to detect to get WADA accreditation. Contador had tested negative previously during the same race, so there was no chance that he could have taken the drugs in an amount that would have given him any performance-enhancing effect. Contador claimed he must have got the substance in his system from eating contaminated meat. Given the benefit of the doubt, he was acquitted by the Spanish authority, but WADA appealed the Spanish ruling to CAS, who handed him a 2-year ban, speculating he might have got the substance from a food supplement rather than a beef, and thus been negligent. I am not suggesting I am convinced that Contador was not doping, as I am confident that young Velitko was a victim of the system. The point I want to make is simply that Contador, whether he was doping or not, was caught by accident. Since his return to cycling, he has done spectacularly well. Sunday he won the Tour of Italy, and he has been tested negative time and time again. If we dare take the average speed at the Tour de France as an indication of the use of doping in cycling, we may add that he was caught by a largely impotent system, a viewpoint that is further supported by the Australian rider Bernard Cole, who tested positive for Sera at the Tour de France in 2008. As he gave up cycling, he admitted he had been tested negative 100 times when he knew he was doped. So the conclusion is, in my opinion, clear. Anti-doping has become a counterproductive system with high personal cost for unfortunate athletes, intentionally doping or not, who are randomly caught and made examples of to prove that the largely ineffective system is worth the investment. I think a new approach is needed. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Verner. I'll now hand over to Vanessa.
Okay, thank you, Verner, for that. In order to answer that question about whether or not doping is unethical and media have some understanding of just what a moral panic is and a sense of the way that the term is being applied in this context. Whilst that discussion is outside the scope of this talk, I'd just like to make a few general points here, which I do elaborate on in my forthcoming book. Generally speaking, one difficulty with the moral panic concept is a tendency in the media and popular culture particularly to apply it to what some have described as a listless range of events. Almost anything can be described as a moral panic. Other more focused criticism has been that the theory lacks theoretical definition and analytical power. However, I would argue that the strength of a moral panic analysis lies not in its scrutiny of the objective status of a particular issue, in this case doping, but the claims of the stakeholders that the issue is a social problem. And if we apply that sort of an approach to doping, it enables us to move the focus away from the athlete to incorporate broader social structures in the analysis, such as the media and sporting bodies. The question is not then limited to why some athletes dope and ways to address such behaviour, which are important issues. Rather, it enables us to ask other questions concerning the impact of doping on sporting bodies, such as whether media reports of doping challenge the legitimacy and the moral authority of those groups. From that perspective, implementing anti-doping measures is an opportunity for sporting bodies to enhance their authority by positioning themselves as doing the right thing or as leaders in protecting the health or integrity of the sporting community. This is important because such an approach has specific and real consequences for athletes and others that are the subject of such moral regulation. Whilst there are many challenges involved in dealing with doping in sport, one of the most important aspects is ensuring there's a regulatory framework that is equitable, consistent and coherent and is as scientifically accurate as possible and that acknowledges athletes' rights. These are central elements to address because they promote positive perceptions of organisational claims to legitimacy and authority, which is important in order to secure support and thus compliance from athletes and other stakeholders. Anti-doping policies and the rationale that underpins them provides a measure against which the authority or legitimacy of sporting bodies can be evaluated. In other words, successful anti-doping regulation requires a policy framework underpinned by a rationale that matches, reflects, and enables the attainment of the goals of that policy and that enjoys community support. The rationale at the core of anti-doping regulation, as articulated by the World Anti-Doping Agency, is to protect the integrity of sport, described in the World Anti-Doping Code as the spirit of sport. And importantly, the code and WADA's goal is also to protect athletes' health. The spirit of sport, like the reasons for the social prohibitions of illicit drugs, may be tacitly understood and conceptually broad, but it is also poorly defined. As a result, it's very difficult to operationalise in terms of policy implementation, which inhibits efforts to ensure consistency and clarity in concrete cases of anti-doping rule violations. More specifically, conflating moral evaluations of doping with a concern for athletes' welfare negates the complexities of modern sport, which is a commercial enterprise constituted by diverse workplaces with their own occupational risks. The pressures and incentives to excel in sport mean that prohibitions, punishments and zero-tolerance policies won't stop experimentation. Whilst these may have some deterrent effect, there are also unintended consequences, such as pushing doping further underground. Beamish and Ritchie argue that increasingly sophisticated testing and surveillance strategies have incentivised innovative ways to avoid getting caught, making some drugs more dangerous for athletes. Even if these risks are the just desserts of cheating, we must ask whether we are prepared to expose future generations of athletes to increased dangers. Anti-doping messages are also heavily weighted with threats about the consequences of getting caught and the dangers associated with drug use, including recreational illicit drug use. These messages emphasise that the responsibility for avoiding illegal substances rests squarely on athletes' shoulders. Athletes clearly must take responsibility for their actions and efforts to address drug use in sport. However, anti-doping messages that reduce the issue to the level of the individual negate the complexities of modern sport, which is a business enterprise with a brand and an image to protect, including Olympic competition, and should be regulated accordingly. It entails a range of workplaces with their own unique intricacies and occupational risks. Just as codes of conduct are important, so too are health and safety. Workplace concerns need to be contextually situated and considered. Like employees in other industries, athletes manage a variety of demands, including whether or not they can keep their position, maintaining the necessary skills to perform their job, and supporting themselves and their families. Rather than address how workplace conditions influence drug use, anti-doping efforts presume that all athletes are potential cheats and focus on individuals' responsibility to avoid these substances. Prioritising testing and surveillance alone threatens to target athletes and support staff who are already caught navigating tensions arising from competitive interests and current rules. Sport organisations and government are concerned about the damage drug use presents to sport. Then let's first be honest about what modern sport is and what it requires of athletes. Rather than punishing individuals for failing to meet an ideal of clean sport that does not exist in practice, let's reorient regulation to directly address occupational health and safety challenges. This in turn enables frank and public discussion about the risks of being an athlete, while also addressing the responsibilities of organisations to mediate them. These discussions should not concentrate simply on drug use or whether or not more athletes are caught doping, but should be about developing more holistic approaches toward athlete health and welfare, which encompass a range of issues underpinned by competitive pressures. Failing to do so undermines the credibility of the reasons applied to guide and justify anti-doping regulation, and, as I note in my book, potentially creates a crisis of legitimacy for organisations involved in anti-doping regulation. Rules that are not defensible in both theory and practice challenge the integrity of the current anti-doping frameworks by potentially undercutting its own cause, healthy and honest competition and competitors in the process. Remedying these inconsistencies provides an opportunity to refine the application of the anti-doping regulations so that drug management, substance control policy and sanctions are just, consistent, coherent and comprehensive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And I forgot to introduce you, Vanessa McDermott from RMIT University in Melbourne. But thank you, Vanessa. That was really useful. I'm going to hand over now to Rob Steen, who is at the University of Brighton and leader of the sport journalism course. So, Rob, if you could join us.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm afraid, like my predecessors, sadly, I feel we do have been in a bit of a moral panic on this particular topic for a very long time, and not a terribly helpful moral panic, if ever there can be such a beast. In fact, I tend to side with the Oxford University ethicist Julian Savulescu, who recently admitted with somewhat refreshing candour, I would prefer my child to take anabolic steroids and growth hormone than play rugby. Growth hormone, he added, is safer than rugby. At least I don't know of any cases of quadriplegia caused by growth hormone. Now, in the context of the other two members of sport's unholy trinity, i.e. match fixing and corrupt governance, performance-enhancing drugs for me should be by far the least of our concerns right now. My own problem with the war on PEDs is perhaps best be explained not by my utter lack of interest in cycling, but by the way my interest in athletics has declined since the field for the 1988 Olympic 100 metres final included Ben Johnson and 5 other blokes who'd failed or would fail drug tests. In principle, the idea that competitors should seek what is perceived as an illegal advantage is abhorrent, though drugs do not, so far as I know, guarantee victory, unlike the match fixers. However, so widespread is the use of PEDs and so unequal a playing field, as Verner has pointed out, has it created, Every time I consider watching Olympic sprint or Diamond League 5,000 meters race, my default position is to suspect every single participant. So when I read the news today, oh boy, was I not surprised, much less angry, that a couple of British heroes, Alan Wells and Mo Farah, had been accused. Now, as a consequence of this attitude of mine, defensible or otherwise, I watched just 4.5 minutes of the 2012 Olympics, which is supposed to be one of the great sporting occasions in England's history. The races I watched were the finals of the men's 100, the 800 and the 1500. All three races took the breath away. But when you still find yourself wondering whether Usain Bolt really is simply a physical freak, it is all too easy for memories to be tainted. I'm fed up, frankly, of not being able to trust my eyes. As with match fixing, once trust goes, the contract between spectator and player is broken, which leaves two options: zero tolerance or honesty. Ban every convicted drug offender for life, or let everyone inject, drink or snort whatever they like. Occupying the middle ground, where suspicion trumps enjoyment, where offenders can be suspended for one period of time by one authority or nation and another by another, and where a governing body, as in the case of Lance Blinking Armstrong, protects this sport's foremost promoter, is clearly not working, as Verner has pointed out so eloquently. Is your doctor on drugs? If not, perhaps they should be. Thus ran the introduction to a story published in the Sunday Times in October 2011. The subject was a study led by Lord Darzi, Professor of Surgery at Imperial College London and the Junior Health Minister under the previous Labour government. The study was prompted by concerns about caffeine, the fatigued surgeon's traditional drug of choice, and its potential for causing hand tremors. Barbara Sahakian, Professor of Psychiatry at Cambridge University, and her research colleague Charlotte Housden gave sleep-deprived surgeons modafinil, a brain stimulant known to boost memory and brain power, and then tested their capacity to think clearly, solve difficulties, and execute simulated operations. Although the drug had yet to undergo long-term safety tests, Professor Sahakian proposed that it could be sold over the counter. We found, he said, that when surgeons had taken modafinil, they saw sharp improvements in their ability to solve problems and think flexibly. In fact, their performance was very good. Performance. They may not ply their trade in front of audience or cameras, or at least not very often, but surgeons are still engaged in the performance. While it might be pushing a point to argue that they should take performance-enhancing drugs, the question of who should and who shouldn't is a persistently troubling one. On the one hand, since the war on drugs in general, it has been largely agreed is unwinnable, as politicians from all three major parties concluded in November 2011, and American federal governments have done since. Surely the money spent on policing, prosecution and imprisonment will be better lavished on treatment for sufferers. On the other hand, since it's far from uncommon for aspiring athletes to gravitate to doping merely in order to make their college team, it could equally be argued that the need to pursue those who supply them is more pressing than ever. For many years, I was utterly convinced there was no point whatever, given the proliferation of masking agents and the mounting expertise of our cleverer chemists, in not legalizing drug use in sport. The battle to combat it was hugely costly, the guilty verdicts all too easily and all too often overturned. Besides, if the greatest physical risk was to the sportsmen themselves, then, frankly, that was their funeral. Then, courtesy of Howard Bryant's superb and comprehensive investigation into baseball's steroid era, juicing the game, I learned of two students in America who had recently died as a consequence of the after effects of steroid use. Steroids can cause depression. One of the unfortunate young men committed suicide. Conviction in my own heart was immediately shaken, but it was not extinguished. Robert Lipsyte, the revered American sports writer, recognized the roots of this development all too clearly. He wrote, "With all the leaked Balco papers, the reefer madness warnings from anti-doping officials, and the media moralizing about big league enhanced performers, there isn't much hard information on steroids and sports, especially its effect on the fastest growing population of users, high school athletes. No one wants to deal with it, I think, because all that entertainment money is beginning to cascade down to the high school level, and everybody wants a taste. A few years ago, one of my journalism students at the University of Brighton had proposed in an article for the course webzine Overtime that we ought to be encouraging the pursuit of excellence by any means that does not involve defying the regulations or intentionally sabotaging the opposition. To meet steroids was the gist of it. Such sentiments provide evidence that among the young, attitudes may be softening. Shortly after this, we held a class debate on this topic, in which one of the participants was Michelle Verroken from UK Sport, the anti-doping authority. The vote in favour of allowing PEDs was very low before the debate. When we asked for a show of hands afterwards, they were very much in the majority. Hans van Grundebeek and Jan Tollenier reinforce this shifting mood. For 8 years between 1998 and 2006, they surveyed first-year undergraduates on a degree course in Human Movement Sciences at the University of Ghent in Belgium. So students were asked to assemble a portfolio of 10 to 50 cuttings from the daily and weekly press on a wide range of subjects, quote, related to the manifestation, social meaning and scientific analysis of sports and physical education. 2 seminars were organized every academic year, and when dealing with doping in sport, none of the tutors took up a particular point of view, but restricted themselves to the clarification of pro and contra arguments presented in the media and research literature. Teaching staff observed an increasingly lenient attitude, with rising numbers of students appearing to criticize the rigid, internationally promoted zero-tolerance policy. But during the first 5 years of the survey, up to 2002-3, more than 80% of the portfolios contained at least one article about doping in elite sport. By 2005, the apparent level of interest had dropped to 60%. By the final year, the proportion was just 34%. More significantly, whereas the zero tolerance category attracted the highest number of students each year, and as many as 69 to 85% during the first 6 years, the share dipped below 50% in 2005 to 6. And while the tolerance category accounts for 2 to 11% over 4 of those first 6 years, in 1999 and 2000, it leapt beyond 20%. In the final year, the share of, quote, indifferent students rose to a peak of 36%. Our results make clear, state the authors, that from 2004 on, the 18-year-old students became more tolerant towards doping use. Now, by way of a further exhibit, Van der Grundebeek and Tollenier cite a New York Times public opinion poll in 2003 that highlighted significant generational differences. While 34% of the older respondents were unconcerned and 31% disturbed by doping, among those in the age category of 18 to 29, the respective figures were 41% and a mere 15%. A survey in another American newspaper, the Denver Post, found that 39% of respondents aged between 18 and 34 advocated legalization under medical supervision, while more than 50% had little or no objection to performance-enhancing drugs. The growth of gene doping, the authors conclude, will be the next step towards redefining our approach to drugs in sport as a much more complicated ethical issue. So with that all in mind, where do we go from here? No doping or safer doping? Because of the inherent physical dangers that might be exacerbated by the more powerful or less fearful participants, rugby, I readily admit, is a sport that defies the first option, but perhaps the game itself needs to change. Given that there is no indication that the chemists will not continue to stay ahead of the testers, and that most observers I know with a disinterested perspective would opt for decriminalization if the subject was recreational drugs, I don't see why the performance-enhancing variety should be treated any different. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Rob. Well, we've had 3 very interesting presentations which have thrown up a lot of questions. What I'd like to ask the presenters to do is now share their webcams, and first of all I'd like to give them an opportunity to briefly respond to each other's presentations.
Well, can I just say firstly that I thought Verner just kicked the things off so brilliantly, because he made so many salient points about the inequities of the system, and I think that was, you know, such a crucial point to this whole discussion. It's something that was intended to create a level playing field, but has actually done the opposite. So congratulations, Verner.
Okay, Verner, would you like to respond to your colleagues' presentations?
Yeah, thank you, Rob, for those kind words. And I must say, when I hear the two of you, we are obviously in agreement that the system that is currently in place is something that needs a rethink or a new approach, because the way that we are working at the moment, where we're trying to close down and narrow the gaps, and what we're seeing there is simply that we are making a nuisance of being an athlete without achieving the goal that is eradicating doping from sport. And we have actually seen that we are starting to create a completely inhuman system. Most recently, there was a suggestion, because of microdosing, which is a really big problem for anti-doping to deal with. We saw a suggestion which they said, well, the slot where people are allowed to sleep undisturbed should now be taken away from them, so that we can alert them and wake them up in the middle of the night to make sure that they are not doping there. These kind of issues seems to me to be inhuman and disrespectful, and that's the reason why I'm really much searching for another way forward. And I'm looking forward to hearing if you have any suggestions for a way forward, which is reclaiming the humanity and the dignity of the athletes.
That is experienced by athletes, and the intrusion into their lives as people. I mean, they are people as much as they are athletes, and in some cases superstars. It is a very important issue, and this presumption of guilt that all athletes are automatically presumed to be guilty, according to the latest anti-doping regime, is problematic. I think in terms of a way forward, it's very difficult, because we do need some sort of regulation, because there are individuals who will push those limits constantly to the boundaries, and that's not healthy for themselves or for other people who might participate in sport. So how do we get that balance of effective anti-doping regulation? And I think if we sort of unlink it, in a sense, to that whole idea of the values and the integrity of sport as being the most important overarching thing, it is one thing that we could think about, because the values and the integrity of sport they're wrapped up in the rules of sport. So we play a particular sport, or we engage in a particular sport, we agree to participate according to those rules and the values that are in those rules. So we don't need another set of values to tell us what's good about sport. And the thing about the privileging the integrity of sport, or the spirit of sport, is that it enables the athlete's rights and the athlete's welfare to become secondary concerns to that broader picture. And I think that's problematic, because these are the people whose lives are actually being affected by taking these substances. So we need to perhaps think of a way to do that. I don't have any amazing answers as to how that might be achieved, but I think it's a conversation that we need to have.
Okay, well, thank you all for that. And first of all, I would encourage more of you to ask questions, send them in. But what I'll do now is go to a first question, which I'll throw to all three of you on the panel. It's a question from Peter Kennedy, and Peter asks, are there valid reasons to distinguish between the use of technology in sport, which is firmly embedded and developing as we speak, and performance-enhancing drug technologies?
Personally, I would say there's no difference between the two. I think it's clear that athletes have been taking advantage of remarkable advances in technology. Arguably one of the greatest and most understated, of course, is video, because it enables them to look at what their opponents do in advance of games, which is, you know, that was impossible 25 years ago or 30 years ago, whatever. I think Peter's, you know, bang on, frankly. I'll pass that one over because my attitude is fairly clear on this one. My colleagues, please chip in.
Well, there is the problem that is the cause of anti-doping, and that is that technology is something that is outside an aid that is not affecting your body directly, whereas doping is something that you take in and that may have potential damaging effect on you. Now we have had anti-doping for so many years. At the beginning, we thought, well, these drugs that have been produced to help sick people, they may have some side effects, and it may happen that athletes start dying if they use them for performance enhancement. That was what created the whole situation at the beginning. That concern, but today I think we've seen that even though athletes are pushed from safe drugs to more unfamiliar drugs, that is in pipeline, and make more risks, take more risks to stay ahead of the doping controllers, we don't see any persons dying from drugs in sport. It's very, very rare. But what we have seen is that people have committed suicide after they have been taking caught doping, and I would say that is radical detrimental to health.
Thank you, and Vanessa.
Yes, yeah, I would have to agree with that comment, Verner, as well, because it is the pressures that it places on athletes to live up to this unrealistic ideal, and if they are caught, even if they're innocent, to try and clear their name, the pressures and the costs that are associated with that are huge, and I'm not sure that it's really fair or realistic that we place that burden on people who are playing sport. You know, that doesn't seem to be a fair arrangement in any way.
Okay, thank you. And we've got another question in, a question from AC. Should offenders be banned for life after failing a drugs test, or do they deserve a second chance? Justin Gatlin may be benefiting from this leniency as his times are sensational and may be aided by his previous doping indiscretions. Vanessa, do you want to kick off on that one first?
Well, I think so many athletes have received a second chance and have done extraordinarily well when they've come back to sport. So I'm not sure it's about whether or not they should be given a second chance. They often are given a second chance and they do come back. I think that we need to take things a step further back and think about, well, what is the purpose of anti-doping regulation? What is it that we're actually trying to achieve, and what's the best way to do that? It's not like, well, all these athletes out here, they're all going to dope, they're all potential cheats. It's like, what are the pressures that might contribute to that? What can we do to make sure that athletes are supported in their work and in their tasks so that they can do that effectively?
Okay.
Okay, sorry, butting in here. I've got to say, I think that question really sums up how complex this whole issue is. In some respects, you could say a zero tolerance attitude is what should work. You know, not the 3 strikes you're out thing, which works in baseball, for example. At the moment, they've got varying lengths of ban depending whether it's first, second, or third offence, etc. But you know, what happens if that drugs test was actually failed completely innocently? You know, as happens. You know, that's what makes this so complex. And we're dealing with shades of criminality, if you want to use the C word in this context. And I think it's got so messy that we have to step further back, even from where Vanessa was talking about the pressures on athletes, how we're going to help them cope. I'm going to draw a parallel here with one of my other passions, which is music. A great number of my favorite musicians, in order to achieve their art and their desires, and entertainers and stimulators and everything that they do, have taken what you might call performance-enhancing drugs. In particular, my own personal musical hero, a chap called Todd Rundgren, he's admitted in person the different drugs he was taking for each album he produced at a particular stage of his career. Now, do I look at him and think, oh, you cheated? No, I don't. Is he competing with other people? Well, yes, he is. He's competing for the public enthusiasm, shall we say, people to buy his records, people to see his concerts. I don't have a problem with that. Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones is an absolute hero the world over for being a ravaged drug abuser, but made some great music. Do we begrudge him his success? I don't think so. Neil Young, very, very much a respected musician. He's done his fair share of inspiration by various means. And is sport really any different? I'm not sure that it is. I'm really not sure that it's sufficiently different to justify such a divergent approach to people who use drugs to fuel their careers, shall we say.
Well, and there is one aspect that should be mentioned when we consider a lifetime ban for drug. That is that it is based on strict liability, and that is that even if you get a drug into your system inadvertently, then you have to explain how it came there, and you have to find a very, very good excuse. It's almost impossible if you first have got something into your body to be exonerated or acquitted. So if we should introduce lifetime bans, then we should also take away the strict liability condition. And if we took away the strict liability condition, we could close anti-doping the day tomorrow, because how would you by any means prove that you have intentionally gotten anything into your body? That's completely impossible. So as it is now, I think it's already 2 harsh penalties that are handed. 2 years for a first offence is 1/5 of a career typically, and it has now been lifted to 4 years. It's a half-life sentence. So in sports, so I think the system is sufficiently rigid as it is now.
Okay, thank you all. We've got time for 3 more questions, which will run us, the last of which will run us into our conclusion. But a question we've got from Sarah is, should we also be looking further afield for some of the solutions? And we've touched on this a bit. Vanessa mentioned athletes being superstars. Are some of the huge commercial rewards through sponsorship contributing to the problem?
It definitely is. It definitely is. The most strange or peculiar or troubling the fact is that it is the person who is winning, who is getting the prize money, who is getting the highest contract, the highest salaries and all that. And given that it is also the person who is most likely the doper, and we don't change that system, spreading the income among every participant so that the person who come last is getting the same amount of money as the person who came first, then that would be a radical solution. It's just one of the strange things in this.
I think that part of that comes back to the fact that the money in sport is not just for the athletes. Obviously, the sporting organisations, the sportswear promoters and all the manufacturers of sporting equipment also make a lot of money. So perhaps we need to incorporate them in the discussion about, if we're really serious about changing doping and making things safer for athletes, well, we need to think about how that money is distributed as well. And for sporting organisations, I think, Verner, you made the point in your talk about how anti-doping now is more about showing that the system's effective, being used to bolster perceptions of the system's credibility and legitimacy, as much as it is actually about doing what it was intended to do, protect athletes' health and their rights and make sport clean and wholesome. So these are things that are not often discussed. What is at stake for sporting organisations in this debate?
Mm-hmm.
See, the problem for me is we've gone so far down the track now, though. I mean, sport is such a multi-billion-pound industry, one way or another. We're not going to turn back time. You know, we're not going to get to a situation where it's not worth your while training for your 10,000 hours to try and be the best that you can possibly be, to achieve a lifestyle, even if not a particular set, sum of money. We can't turn that back down. I mean, and I'm not somebody who ever had much time for the dishonesty of shamateurism, and the Olympics as it used to be. I prefer this more open world. And I don't think that considerations of money are really, there's nothing we can do about it. I think, we can discuss it all we like, but there's nothing we can do about it. I don't think there's any point in going down that road, to be honest with you, without to diminish the question in any way. I just don't see how that will be helpful in any way.
Okay, thank you all three. A question we've touched on a few times coming from Peter Charlish. If we do allow a free-for-all, are we not in effect forcing athletes to dope, as they would have no chance otherwise?
I'm waiting for someone else to respond because I jump in as usual. I think this is where we have to ask ourselves the biggest questions, don't we? If we're saying everyone can do what they want, the point really is we want safer doping. It's not so much I don't want people to dope. I think if they're going to dope, which I think is happening, we're not really stopping it, then make it safer. Get money invested, as we do with heroin addicts, in trying to help them take the sort of drugs that don't have that sort of damage. That the drugs can be improved and not rushed, if you like, in their development, where it's all much more above board and it's not going around trying to cheat the whole time. It is open. And I think we have a better chance of having drugs that are not fatal if we do that. That may sound very simplistic, but I honestly can't think of another way to get further forward in this discussion.
I think part of what we need to think about, as I said in my talk, was thinking about how we can make workplaces safer for athletes, because this is their workplace, whether they're in Olympic competition or whatever sort of competition, professional sport or not. So we need to have policies that are going to make that workplace safer. So if everybody's taking substances to improve their performance, well, obviously they need to have frameworks that help them to do that. And I think that, sorry, just completely lost my train of thought there. So I'll hand over to somebody else, and hopefully it will come back to me in the meantime.
Okay. Well, but I could then perhaps jump in here and say that what is it? What is that sports is about? Sports. Those who promote sports, the sports since Coubertin was talking about sport as educational. And if we take that trajectory and take that seriously, that it is educational, then part of the education could now be, since we have become familiar with doping in sport, and we have heard lots of lessons about the detrimental effects of using drugs. So now, if we take this seriously, we could say that, it's up to you to decide for yourself. You're a mature person. We have taught you about the side effect. We have told you. We have informed you. Everything is done to make you make an informed choice for yourself. Then you can take whatever you want to win the medal. But you also have information about what the consequences are. And if it then turns out that you, as a mature person, is killing yourself by what you are doing, well, that is your funeral.
I think that I think that education is clearly a very important thing, and athletes must take responsibility and they must be educated in order to make good decisions. But I think what that fails to recognise is the environment in which they're in. They're in a highly competitive environment under extreme pressures. They've invested all their lives, many athletes, in this environment, so they get a very narrow focus. So seeing outside that to think about something that might happen at some point, maybe later on, when on offer is the status and the prestige, even if it's not the money, the status and the prestige of being a world-class champion athlete at the peak of their game, the top of their game. I think it's very difficult to ask people to make or expect them to make rational decisions about those sorts of consequences when they're in that enviorment.
But for more than
I think education.
But for more than 200 years, or at least 100 years, we've learned that the most important thing is not winning but taking part, and that is part of the education. So basically, it's just going back to the values of sport and understand what it's about, and it's not that important.
Yeah, but I don't think.
But they aren't the values of sport now anymore.
Winning is not everything.
Winning. The trouble is, we're talking about aspects of sport where winning is everything. That's the problem. We're talking about professional sport here. We're not talking about amateur sport. And I think we have to respect, that these are careers, these are lives, and it's right. Not the same mentality. Right. I'm not saying in any way that I encourage bad behaviour, foul tackles, brutality, any of this stuff. But I think we have to accept that this is a little bit more, important than something that's about it's the taking part rather than the winning.
Okay, well, thank you all three of you. That brings us to what I think would be a perfect final question. We were going to do concluding thoughts, but Susan Backhouse has sent in an excellent question saying, what would a new approach look like? And we've covered some of the ground, but if I could ask each of you in turn to in one or two sentences, just to conclude for us. Verner.
Well, I think that the most or the best way forward would be to get away from simply take away the word doping, put that aside, and say, well, we have various means out there that are performance enhancing, and we are checking your health. We know that you may be tempted to use these drugs. To make certain that we don't damage, that you don't damage your health, to be able to participate in competition, you have to go through certain health checks. And if you have a too high testosterone level or too high hematocrit level or whatever, and you tested on all these parameters, then if you're beyond a certain normal level, then we're saying you cannot start in this race, but we're not banning it. We're just saying you have to be healthy to take part in sport, and that would be a pragmatic way forward. And I know and I understand that people could then come and claim that, well, this is basically saying that we're legalizing doping, but I think it is the best way forward for the athletes, and we get rid of all this history and all these sad stories about athletes who have been vilified and has lost their social lives and all that, sometimes even because they've taken a drug inadvertently.
Thank you. Vanessa, next.
Yes, I think I agree with you there in terms of putting the athlete's welfare first. So having those sorts of perhaps medical supervisions around whether or not they can participate and remove the doping stigma. And that's really what I was thinking about in my talk, is that the athlete health and welfare has to be the priority. It's not the values of sport or the integrity of sport. It's the health and welfare of these athletes. And I think sporting organisations, whether they're sporting bodies or governments that supply public funding to sport and are therefore accountable for that public funding, really need to think about how they are, or whether or not they are, prioritising the health of their employees or the athletes that might be involved in those competitions.
Thank you. And finally, Rob.
I would just only like to add, to be honest, how rather lovely it's been to share this webinar with two people from very different countries to my own, and to know that we all basically united as one. And I think that's a good thing to know, to be honest with you. And that's my final word on the subject.
Fantastic. Okay, well, it remains for me to thank Verner, Vanessa and Rob for what have been 3 excellent presentations and a very lively discussion. Thank you to those of you in the audience for attending and supporting us in this webinar, and for the questions you've sent in. I'm sure we could run webinar number 2, but I can encourage you to go online to routledge.com/sport, and you'll see updates and information about the publications and details about the recording of the webinar. So thank you very much for your attendance today, and look forward to seeing you online again. Thank you.